everybody, welcome back to Logo Panda channel. I hope you're doing completely well today. I hope everything in your life is all good and dandy. Welcome back. It is a Thursday, which is very different, but it is still true crime segments thing. Except we're calling it True Crime Talk, because I can't necessarily call it True Crime Friday when it's not a Friday. I'm just not at home tomorrow. And next week I've been invited out for someone's birthday drinks. So, said person turned 30 last year, is 31 this year, but unfortunately due to the time of year they turned 30, we could not celebrate it due to lockdown. So, we're doing this right now. So, this week is a big one. Are you ready? Are you ready? The big true crime case today is all history and all things that most people don't even know is a thing. But you are all very much aware of the Peaky Blinders. We are covering the case of the Peaky Blinders and the Birmingham Boys today. Now, if you are wondering why are you going on about the Peaky Blinders, it's a TV show. It's a TV show, correct. It's an incredible TV show that I love myself. I've watched it myself and I love it as well. But the show is actually based off a real gang in Birmingham. The Peaky Blinders were once real people. They were once a real gang who did actually rule Birmingham for quite a number of years. But also so did the Birmingham Boys at one point. Now, I'm going to give you a little bit of a spoiler about the case. There is no Thomas Shelby. There's no Shelbys. I'm afraid we're not going to be talking about any John Shelby, Arthur Shelby, Peggy Gray. No. Polly Gray. Why did I say Peggy? Polly Gray. We're not going to be talking about anyone like that, unfortunately. There's none of that. But there is a Thomas, he's just not a Shelby. But we're going to be talking about them today because it's a very interesting story that I managed to get quite a bit of info on, and I will be recommending things to you guys so you guys can read it yourself if you so wish. So, today, like I said, Peaky Blinders and the Birmingham Boys. I'm going to do a quick disclaimer. I'm also going to turn my music off because I really don't see the point in doing the music. So quick disclaimer for everyone. Bear in mind, I want to point out this disclaimer. I use it for pretty much every single true crime stream. Not everything that I am going to say in the disclaimer is going to be featured. I'll tell you which ones, just to clarify. So, just a quick disclaimer. Like I've just said, this is a true crime stream segment, but still. No one is glorifying these crimes and or criminals. This stream is for historical, especially this one, and educational reasons, and to remember the victims of these crimes. We kind of don't know much about these victims because this is a very much dug up part of history. I do not mean to offend anyone with this stream. Any money donated during a true crime segment goes straight to charity. This one in particular will go directly to people who have been victims of gang violence. This stream may mention murder, violence. There will not be sexual assault. There will not be mentions of rape or child abuse. But if you are triggered by murder and violence and gangs, thievery, this kind of thing, so you may find this upsetting and or triggering, and if you do, this is not the stream for you. But yeah, so today, the Birmingham Boys and the Peaky Blinders. Now we're going to be going in timeline order. So, I've got my trusty tablet. Okay. See when it gets to the members of the group. Okay, so we're going to start off with... It starts off this entire tale with the Peaky Blinders. Now I've got a picture of them right here. Right here for you guys to look at. These are the only pictures of the Peaky Blinders, the original Peaky Blinders that actually exists, for what we know of so far. So, if you are not aware, the Peaky Blinders, they were a... So, we're going to start this from basically what we already know about the Peaky Blinders. Peaky Blinders, as most people may be familiar with, they are a gang that is on a TV show called The Peaky Blinders on BBC. It's also available on Netflix, by the way. It's a very good show, highly recommend. Now, the actual gang in the show is based off actual people. It's based on a real gang that did run Birmingham. The only thing that's basically not accurate is the fact that they are the Shelbys. It's very much glorified in some ways. The timeline is wrong with them. Pretty much they weren't. They ran Birmingham. Do not get me wrong, but they didn't get to the insane amount of wealth that Tommy Shelby does. Spoiler. So, the Peaky Blinders were a street gang based in Birmingham, England, that operated from the end of the 19th century to about the early 1900s. It roughly goes from around 1890 to around 1910 at the latest. We will also go into we're going to go into the whole thing. The group, which grew out of the harsh economic deprivations of working class Britain, were composed largely of young men from lower to middle class. They derived social power from robbery, violence, racketeering, illegal bookmaking, and the control of gambling. Pretty much similar to what you already completely see in the show. Members of this gang wore signature outfits that included tailored jackets, laughable overcoats, button waistcoats, silk scarves, bell-button trousers, leather boots, and peaked flat caps. Very similar to, like I said, what you do see in the show. And you realise, if you notice in the show, they're always dressed very, very well in tailored suits. They're always wearing overcoats, very nice overcoats. They're wearing their caps, which had iconically razor blades in the flaps. Now that's not really true. I think that's basically the only fictional part about the gang, really, that gets incorporated into the show based on their looks, really. The Blinders' dominance came literally about beating rivals, such as the Sloggers. So basically what was going on around this time in Birmingham was that there was a lot of different gangs, and they kind of operated and ran the entire city at different points in time. So they had, before the Peaky Blinders, you had the Sloggers, and now the Sloggers ran Birmingham for quite a number of years, until the Peaky Blinders came along and pretty much took over. It's never anything where they take over in a nice way. It's always through something that includes a lot of shit and a lot of drama, a lot of violence. And this obviously will result in the Peaky Blinders' demise. I guess loss of power. Better way to put it. So they fought for the territory in Birmingham and its surrounding districts. They held control for nearly 20 years until 1910, when a larger gang, the Birmingham Boys, led by Billy Kimber, took over them. Now, if you may recognize the name Billy Kimber. Billy Kimber is a character in the TV show Peaky Blinders, and he is the only one person that is actually accurately taken from real life into the show. Well, the only thing that's not accurate with him is how he literally fell from power. We will go into that though. Although they had disappeared by the 1920s, the name of the Peaky Blinders became a synonymous slang term for any street gang in Birmingham. So it didn't matter if you weren't the Peaky Blinders, you were labelled as the Peaky Blinders. Economic hardship in England led to a violent youth subculture. Poor youths frequently robbed and picked the pockets of men walking on the streets of slum Birmingham. Because at the time, Birmingham was pretty much, still kind of is, a shithole. This is a very good picture. This is basically a very nice looking picture of Small Heath in Birmingham, which is where they mostly operated in the show. That is also where they operate as well. But this is Birmingham, in Small Heath, roughly around this time, if not a little bit afterwards. These efforts were executed through assaults, beatings, stabbings, and manual strangulation, basic, more or less. Sorry, I'm trying to basically change the pictures at the same time. So the origins of the subculture can be traced back to the 1850s, in a time where Birmingham streets were filled with gambling dens and youth playing rough sports. Basically, everything was more or less illegal. When the police started to crack down on these activities due to the pressure from the higher classes, the youth fought back, banding together in what became known as slogging gangs. These gangs frequently fought the police, assaulted members of the public walking in the streets. During the 1890s, youth street gangs consisted of men between the ages of 12 and 30. The late 1890s saw the organisation of these men into soft hierarchy. The most violent of these street gangs organised themselves as a singular group known as the Peaky Blinders. They were likely founded in Small Heath, possibly by a man named Thomas Muklow. Now this is just a suspicion. This is not actual definite, but this basically Thomas Muklow is the man on the very end right here. Now the man on the very end, those are the same guy, the two pictures, it's just one without, one with the hat, one without. So this man right on the very end of the picture here is Thomas Muklow. You cannot already tell where I'm going with this. This man was basically the inspiration for Thomas Shelby. Now, this was only suggested by a newspaper article. Now, the newspaper article says, and quote, "A murderous outrage in Small Heath, a man's skull fractured." Now, this was printed on the 24th of March, 1890, in an edition of the Birmingham Mail. This article is possibly the earliest evidence of the Peaky Blinders in actual full print. The article then carries on to say, and quote, "A serious assault was committed upon a young man named George Eastwood, living at 3 Court 2 House Arthur Street, Small Heath, on Saturday night. It seems that Eastwood, who has been for some time a local abstainer, called between 10 and 11 o'clock at the Rainbow Public House in Alderley Street, and was supplied a bottle of ginger beer. Shortly afterwards, several men known as the Peaky Blinders gang, whom Eastwood knew by their sight from living in the same neighbourhood as himself, came in. After some gangsters attacked a man in 1890, they sent a letter to various newspapers declaring themselves as members of this very specific group, so they wanted themselves to be quite known. Their first activities primarily revolved around occupying favourable land, mostly the communities of Small Heath and Cheapside in Birmingham. Their expansion was noted by their first gang rival, the Cheapside Sloggers, who battled against them in an effort to control the land. The Sloggers originated in the 1870s and were known for street fights in the Bawdsley and Small Heath areas, pretty much the poorer parts of Birmingham, because that's pretty much where all these gangs came from. No one ever came from wealth. It was basically from poorer parts of the city. They came together due to the poor conditions and just found ways to survive, but ended up doing them in groups, which made them into street gangs. The Peaky Blinders, after they established controlled territory in the late 19th century, began expanding their criminal enterprise. Their activities included protection rackets, fraud, land grabs, smuggling, hijacking, robbery. I'm still watching the third season. Do not worry, I will not be giving any spoilers out for the entire show. Do not worry, this is not revolving around the show, this is revolving around them, and their ending does not match the show. Plus the show's not ended, so technically their endings and the actual ending are inaccurate because the dates are fucked as well. So do not worry, there is no spoilers here. We good. Spoiler free zone. So they established controlled territory in the late 19th century and began expanding their criminal enterprise. Their activities included protection rackets, fraud, land grabs, smuggling, hijacking, robbery, and illegal bookmaking. Historian Heather Shaw in the University of Leeds actually claims that the Blinders were more focused on street fighting, robbery, and racketeering as opposed to more organised crime. The group was known actually for its violence, but not only on innocent civilians, but also on rival gangs and constables. If you've watched season 1, you can tell that part is accurate. Dude, don't worry about it, because this is all, after reading, like, the research on this entire thing, I can tell you, as someone who is pretty much caught up with the show, it ain't accurate, so you're good. The only thing that's accurate is basically, like, the violence to the constables. The rest of it, you're fine. And if you've gone past season 1, you're sorted. So, gang wars between rival gangs frequently erupted in Birmingham because the gangs were quite more prominent there around the time. Like I said, there was multiple gangs and they tend to rule for quite a fair amount of time. Mostly, at least, from what I've seen, 20 years max. And then before they get shooed off by another rival gang. But there'd be other smaller ones around the area, hopefully trying to get the crown, basically. But if there's a bigger gang and they're doing a lot more and they're a lot more violent and they've got better things, then there's probably a very big chance that you're not going to get there. So the gang wars between rival gangs frequently erupted in Birmingham, which actually led to brawls and shootouts. Cigarettes are more consistent in the show. They're very consistent. There's not much about how much they smoked, by the way, like the real life people. We have no idea, because there isn't as much on them as you'd think, but there's a lot of historians trying to dig into them a lot more. So we'll see within time, I guess. The Peaky Blinders also deliberately attacked police officers in what became known as constable baiting. Constable George Snipe was killed actually by the Peaky Blinders in 1897, as was Charles Philip Gunter in 1901. Hundreds more were injured and some left the force because of the violence due to the Peaky Blinders. So a lot of police officers were actually scared of the gang. Soon the term Peaky Blinder became a generic term for young street criminals in Birmingham. In 1899, an Irish police chief named Charles Houghton Rafter was contracted to enforce local law in Birmingham. Now, you've watched the show. If you've watched season 1, you may remember a specific Irish police chief that actually came twandling his way through Small Heath in the show. Like I said, the most you're going to get is season 1 shit. However, police corruption and bribery diminished the effectiveness of his enforcement for the time. So basically, this guy was actually more willing to actually listen and actually do what Thomas actually said. Not Shelby, the other Thomas. So we're going to go into the members of the Peaky Blinders. We've mostly got a picture of them, but all here. The most notable ones you will find are Thomas Gilbert and Harry. So we're going to go into these guys. Now, the most powerful members of the Peaky Blinders was a man named Kevin Mooney. Now, Kevin Mooney, his real name was actually Thomas Gilbert, but he did routinely change his name quite a fair bit. So, Thomas Gilbert, let me get him up for you. Yeah, everyone hated that guy. This is Thomas Gilbert. He was one of the most powerful members of the Peaky Blinders. Thomas Gilbert, aka one of the main members, aka probably the leader of the Peaky Blinders, you can kind of guess who he is based on. Well, who's based off him. He looks more like Arthur, doesn't he? He looks a bit more like Arthur than he does Shelby. So, obviously, they're not going to get super accurate. So yeah, this man right here is Kevin Mooney, but his real name was Thomas Gilbert. But like I said, he routinely changed his name. Some other prominent members of the gang were David Taylor, who is the second person in the picture with my hand. There we go. This is David Taylor. Ernest Hayes. I'm pretty sure. To be fair, this might be David Taylor, but it also might be Ernest Hayes. The writing is not 110% clear. Looks like Dr. Phil. He does. So yeah, we've got David Taylor or Ernest Haynes. The writing's quite difficult to read. We've got Harry Fowls on the very end. We've got Stephen McNichol. And then we've got Thomas Gilbert right on the very end right here. They've just got a picture of him without the cap on and with the cap on. Harry Fowls was also one of the other members that was quite prominent, mostly for the fact that he looks quite young. In this picture, Harry is actually 19 years old. So this is Harry Fowls. He was one of the other most powerful members of Peaky Blinders. He was arrested. He was also known as Baby-Faced Harry. You can probably kind of see why. He was arrested at the age of 19 for stealing a bicycle in October 1904. McNichol and Haynes were also arrested. There's so much picture changing. So, yeah, he was arrested for stealing a bicycle. McNichol and Haynes were also arrested at the same time for stealing a bicycle and for committing home invasion, respectively. Each were held for 1 month for their crimes. West Midlands police records described the three arrested as, and quote, foul-mouthed young men who stalked the streets in drunken groups, insulting and mugging passers-by. Sounds pretty much like the Peaky Blinders. David Taylor was arrested at the age of 13 for carrying a loaded firearm. So they've all had the fair share of the time. Many of these gang members right here actually, and some others. So Peaky Blinders were a lot bigger, but the Peaky Blinders gang was actually quite a very large gang, but bear in mind, these were the only members that history can currently find. Many gang members later fought in the First World War because it was actually expected of young men for around that time to just be conscripted into the war regardless, unless they were doctors, policemen, firemen, anyone that had a job that looked like they were needed at home. They were not needed at home, but needed in their country instead of going away to war. So if you didn't have one of those most prominent jobs, you were probably going to get conscripted. And a lot of these guys were in fact conscripted. The fact that they were criminals means that they definitely were sent to war. Harriet Lightfoot, aka Harry Fowls, the first person to be named as a Peaky Blinder, joined the British Army 3 times in his life and participated in the Battle of Somme in 1916. Oh no, sorry, this is a different one. Sorry, Henry Lightfoot was the one who participated in the Battle of Somme in 1916. One of the youngest gang members when he joined, which was Henry Fowler, was years later actually buried alive in the trenches after being extradited. He could not speak or see for some time following the war, so his life was actually quite short. He pretty much died before 1920. Notorious gangster Billy Kimber was also a former Peaky Blinder. There you go. Billy Kimber was a real person, like I said earlier, and he actually was one of the original members of the Peaky Blinders before eventually that pretty much changed. So like I said, in this picture we can see Harry, David, Stephen McNichol, and Thomas Gilbert. In addition to guns, the Peaky Blinders used an assortment of melee weapons such as belt buckles, metal-tipped boots, fire irons, canes, and knives. The only thing, it's quite the death, isn't it? They didn't use, like I said earlier, they didn't do the whole legendary razor blades in the cap. In the case of George Eastwood, which is one of the men that they actually killed, he was beaten to death by belt buckles. Percy Langridge used a knife to stab Police Constable Barker in June 1900. So Percy Langridge was another member of the Peaky Blinders. There's just not a picture of him that we know of. Firearms such as Webley revolvers were used, such as in the shooting and killing of a Summerhill gang member by Peaky Blinder William Lacey in September 1905. So right now, in relation to the gang, there have been up to about 4 deaths. Shit, that shut me up. Nathan, Joshy, thank you for the follow. Thank you for the follow, my friend. That did shit me up. That's because I'm still wearing my headphones. I guess that's kind of on me. Thank you for the follow. Welcome to the family. I'm glad you're clearly enjoying yourself. So right now there's been about 4 deaths related to the Peaky Blinders, not all done necessarily together, but it's kind of all together, I guess, in a way. Gang members frequently wore tailored clothing, which was uncommon for the gangs at the time. Almost all members wore a flat cap and an overcoat. The Peaky Blinders wore tailored suits. This is one accurate thing that the TV show did get right, and that was basically their outfits, their very eye-catching outfits. No, never be sorry for the interruption, that was awesome. So all the members wore a flat cap and an overcoat. The Peaky Blinders wore tailored suits, usually with bell-bottom trousers and button jackets. Wealthier members wore silk scarves and starched collars with metal tie buttons. Their distinctive dress was easily recognisable by city inhabitants, police, and rival gang members. The wives, girlfriends, and mistresses of the gang members were known for wearing lavish clothing. Pearls, silks, and colourful scarves were commonplace. So that is one thing that you can actually use to look at with the show. If you watch the show, you can always tell who are the wealthier members of the gang. It's very obvious who, but you'll notice the fact that there is a very clear point where the main gang members of the Peaky Blinders in the show, as well in real life, the ones who are a lot more richer wore silk scarves and starched collars with metal tie buttons. So look out for that next time you watch the show. If you see any gang members in the show wearing anything like that, know they're pretty well off. After nearly a decade of political control, their growing influence brought on the attention of a larger gang. Now this gang was the Birmingham Boys. The Peaky Blinders' expansion into race courses led to violent backlash from the Birmingham Boys gang. So in the TV show, in season 1, the Peaky Blinders start to go to race courses and they take their business there. It pretty much happens in the first few episodes. So don't worry, there's no spoilers, do not worry, they just go into race courses. But in the show, it clearly goes quite well and it becomes a continuous thing for most of that season. In relation to Billy Kimber, obviously. Now, unlike the show obviously the Peaky Blinders have more of a success with this, and Billy Kimber does not. But in reality, in real life, it actually was the completely other way around. Billy Kimber actually had the higher end of this. Due to the fact that he used to be a Peaky Blinders member himself, he had more of an insight on how everything worked and how they ran their gangs in total. So, like I said, they went to race courses and it led to violent backlash from the Birmingham Boys gang, which was ran by Billy. Peaky Blinders families physically distanced themselves from Birmingham's centre into the countryside. With the Blinders' withdrawal from the criminal underworld, the Sabini gang moved in on the Birmingham Boys gang. The solidified political control over central England in the 1930s. Now, there is another name that you might recognise if you watch the show. The Sabini gang are another key part of the TV show itself. Told you there's some truths. Other elements such as education, discipline, and harsher policing and sentencing also contributed to the decrease of the Blinders' influence. And by the 1920s, they had pretty much completely disappeared. As the specific gang known as Peaky Blinders diminished, their name became used as just a generic term to describe a violent street youth. The gang's activities lasted pretty much from the 1880s all the way until the 1910s. And obviously, a bit later on, after the 1910s, most of the gang went straight into the First World War, and a lot of them didn't come back. There was none of that. They went into the war, then came back and got bigger and more powerful, but they had the PTSD. There was none of that. It was the complete other way. Hello, Aaron Green. Hello, Green. I need to watch Peaky Blinders. Yeah, you do. Yes, you do. Don't worry, there's no spoilers to the show here. So, a little bit of a thing that you might be interested in if you do watch the show is the fact that obviously got pictures of Small Heath right here. So this was the actual Small Heath right here that you can see. It's very different to the show, but obviously there's more parts of the place. There's also, for most people who are a big fan, the Garrison is actually a real pub, and it's still actually there today in Small Heath in Birmingham, if anyone wants to take a quick visit. So the Garrison is actually a real pub. You can also probably go to most of the Peaky Blinders bar chains, I guess. There's one in Manchester. on Peter Street near Deansgate, but this is the actual garrison. Here you go, it's the real life garrison. Doesn't look too much, doesn't really look like the one from the show, does it? So next we're going to go into the life of the one and only Billy Kipper. So Billy Kipper, you can buy Peaky Blinders single malt Scotch whiskey. You can buy it online. Kind of want to buy it, yo. I kind of want to go. I kind of want to go and get it. So the next person we're going to look into now is Billy Kipper. So we're going to carry on from when the Peaky Blinders pretty much disappeared into how Birmingham was pretty much ran by the Birmingham Boys, mostly Billy Kipper. If you watch the show, then you'll know about Billy Kimber, and you'll know that it's very, very different. So, especially the fact they, took over. It's the only thing I'll say. Took over in real life. This is going to be so hard to not say season 1 spoilers. Season 1 spoilers is the only thing that I can really do. The rest is just like, yeah. So the Birmingham Boys, also known as the Birmingham Boys or the Brum Boys, were a street gang whose power extended from the north of England to London's underworld between the 1910s and the 1930s. They lost control of the southeast race. They lost control of the southeast race courses to the Sabini gang. There you go. Sabinis were actually real. We're not going into the Sabini gang though today. I've got a brew here. I've got a cup of tea, and I need to make sure I drink it. In modern times, all these gangs are mostly known to the TV show. William Billy Kipper was born in 1882 in Birmingham and was head of the Birmingham Boys. Much of his criminal work was based on England's racecourses. Following the Gambling Act 1845, the only gambling allowed in England was actually at racetracks. The introduction of special excursion trains meant that all the classes of society could attend the new courses across the country. Huge amounts of cash were generated, and bookmakers had to employ bodyguards against protection gangs operating within fast grounds. With gangs in Oxford and Leeds, Kipper controlled racecourses in the Midlands and in the North. For several years, he was the biggest crime boss in the UK, using intimidation and extreme violence. His gang used razors, knuckle dusters, and pistols. He set up a secondary base in Islington to concentrate on the racetracks in the south of England, teaming up with London gang boss Charles Wag MacDonald. Kipper also formed alliances with smaller organisations such as the Hoxton Gang and the Elephant and Castle Mob. However, Kipper's gang began to prey on Jewish bookies from London's East End at racecourses in the southeast. These bookies turned to local underworld boss Edward Emanuel for help, who in turn recruited Darby Sabini's gang as protection. Initially, Italian gangster Sabini was the inspiration for Colleen Graham Greene's novel Brighton Rock. So we might go into him, the Sabini gang, one day. Maybe next week, we'll see. Now, this actually triggered a long-standing and extremely violent rivalry between the two organisations. In March 1921, the Birmingham Boys ambushed Sabini at Greenford Park trotting track. A few days later, Kipper was actually found shot and beaten in King's Cross after actually only going to visit Sabini. The violence escalated, but Sabini gained the upper hand when 23 Birmingham Boys were locked up following the Epsom Road battle, when 60 of Kipper's men attacked their rivals with hatchets, hammers, and bricks. So due to the unwelcome attention from the press and the authorities, an arrangement was made in 1926. The Exeter and Plymouth Gazette revealed that the two remarkable confederacies had called a truce. Now, I'm going to show you actually the newspaper article, so I do actually have it with me. Give me a second. So here you go. I'm pretty sure this is... Yep. So we've got a newspaper article right here. Do not worry, I've got it all written down from what I could actually gather from it, so I will read it out to you. But there you go, there's an actual newspaper clipping involving Billy Kimber. So, due to Confederacies had called a truce, they now held joint conferences under a regular chairman at which they carefully allocated each other's respective spheres of activity and settled plans and policy. Bookmaker, now this is what it says, and quote, I'm going to read this entire newspaper article out to you. Bookmaker acquitted at the Central Criminal Court yesterday before Mr. Justice Darling Alfred Solomon, 27. Bookmaker was found not guilty of an unlawful wounding Mr. William Kipper and discharged. Mr. Coutag Fulton for the prosecution said that an altercation took place between the defendant and Kipper at a house at King's Cross where a number of racing men were drinking. A revolver was discharged and the bullet wounded Kipper. On the following day, the defendant gave himself up to the police. Kipper said he said was the head of the Birmingham gang of terrors. He was holding a revolver and was very gruesome, and the defendant knocked the revolver from his hand and picked it up. There was a struggle in which, of course, it went off. Mr. Justice Darling stopped the case, pointing out there was no evidence against the defendant. This was in the Times on the 28th of April, 1921. Let me get up the picture of Billy again for you. Nevertheless, the determination of the police had to stamp out that the gangs had preyed on bookies and onlookers this eventually contributed to the rapid decline of racecourse gangs. Arrests, severe sentences, and the introduction onto the racecourses of the Flying Squad, the Specialist Crime and Operations Section within the Metropolitan Police Service, eroded the gang's power. In 1924, the Jockey Club set up a department to supervise the rings and kept out undesirables and known bad characters, while bookmakers' protection associations formed pitch committees to protect and safeguard racecourses' bookmakers' rights. After Billy Kimber went to America after he had fired shots through the door of the Griffin and a drinking club used by the Sabinis. From Arizona, where it's believed he killed a man who owed him money, he journeyed to Los Angeles and then to Chicago. In the Windy City, he was hidden by a friend from England called Murray Humphreys. Murray Humphreys, who was friends with Kipper, actually was part of Al Capone's notorious gang. So this all connects. So Billy Kipper, who was the head of the Birmingham Boys, was connected briefly to Al Capone. Well, I'm not really surprised by that, but I'm not really mad at it, to be fair. They could dress worse. Kipper then came back to England in about 1929. He became involved in the Wimbledon dog track and continued to operate on the racecourses of the southwest of England. Always astute, he released that law and order was coming to the flat courses operated by the Jockey Club and to the jumps run by the National Hunt. However, illegal money-making opportunities were still available at the less supervised point-to-point races for hunting horses and amateur riders over farmers' land. Newspaper advertisements giving a Yeovil telephone number urged racers to bet with a reliable man, Billy Kimber, at point-to-point across Devon and Cornwall. In October 1940, Billy Kimber attended the funeral of another Devonian bookmaker and was noted as the president of Devon and Cornwall Bookmakers Association. Interesting facts about Billy, innit? At this time, Kipper was living at his Torquay home at 10 Park Hill Road, if you want to go see if it's still there in Avaganda. This is all for a day out for you. In the Peaky Blinders, if you do not want a spoiler for season 1, if you are wanting to start the show, I'll go like this, and that means you can come back. So I just mute it for like a second, okay? In 3, 2, 1, good. In the Peaky Blinders TV show, Billy Kimber is shot dead by Tommy Shelby, but in reality, William Kipper actually died in 1942 at the age of 63 at Mount Stewart Nursing Home after just a very long illness, really. There's actually a newspaper article that they released about Billy Kipper's death. So it's just like a little segment right here. Though born and raised in Birmingham's back streets, Kipper's funeral was attended by many as he was seen as a respected and legitimate businessman. So he wasn't actually that. He was feared, but he was not hated, unlike the Peaky Blinders. He certainly died a rich man. He actually left his wife, Elizabeth Kipper, a huge sum of £3,665, which in today's money actually goes to about £177,134.17. His obituary in the local newspaper asserted that, and quote, his great interest in life, both personal and professional, was racing, and he was well known and respected on every racecourse in England, end quote. Others knew him as a much feared fighting man, a powerful gangster, organizer of protection rackets and gangland alliances, an unforgiving foe to his enemies. Now, I know this was kind of a short one. Do not get me wrong. I'm aware of this. I'm aware. But yeah, Billy Kimber died in Torquay on the 27th of June 1943 at a nursing home just due to a very normal long illness. And that's pretty much how the story ends. The Birmingham Boys pretty much deteriorated, and the leadership of Birmingham went to the Sabini gang, as much as the people who watched Peaky Blinders TV show may be disgusted to hear. That's pretty much what happened, and to this day, Birmingham is just a free-for-all from what I'm aware of, and there's no one really controlling it. There might be, but I don't really know. If you do, please let me know. But that, my friends, is the one and only true story, the rise and fall of the Peaky Blinders. Hopefully there is a lot more information that comes out about them at some point, because I know there's apparently a lot of historians trying to dig up more interesting facts about them because of the show, but we shall have to see. Gangster's got better story than politician. I know, right? Give me a sec. I've not turned the hallway light off. I can move. I keep leaving it on because I'm an idiot. But yeah, no, they really did. Like, gangsters pretty much did a lot of shit better. I don't know, their stories are a lot more interesting, as you've already pointed out. Very weird how more interesting they are. It's not even weird, is it? It's just like, they're just a lot more interesting. But to the people who are watching this on YouTube or as a highlight on Twitch, thank you so much for watching. This was this week's True Crime Talks. For everyone who is watching on Twitch, we're going to move over to play some Minecraft. And build our Halloween town. Have you guys got any horror movies, any horror house suggestions? If you do, put them in there. Come on, let's do this. We've got a good hour left of this stream. We can do this. But if you are here for the crime talks, and only the crime talks, I'll be back next Thursday. I don't know what I'm covering yet. I'm kind of in, maybe Al Capone. Ooh, we don't know. Let's see.